for us atheists, humanists, and freethinkers. The Reason Rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where we drew 30,000 in the rain on March 24th. Following the lecture, there will be a brief Q&A. If you are interested in asking a question, line up behind one of the microphones after the last speaker. There's one going to be on that side and one on that side. After Q&A, the speakers will be signing books on stage. A line will form along that wall over there, and there will be a sales table along the line where you can buy books while we are waiting. Unfortunately, I think we've sold out of all of our Dawkins books. I'm sorry to say. Who here is from San Diego? Who here is from out of town? I know we have some meetup groups coming by the ways. Who here belongs to a local humanist, atheist, bride, skeptic, free thought, flying spaghetti monster group? They typically have to dip deeply into their own pockets to finance the endeavors of these groups. Would all those who lead, serve on the board, organize meetups, in other words, will the people keeping our grassroots operations going please stand up and be thanked for your service to our community? They provide inspiration, a sense of community and belonging, and intellectual sustenance for critical thinkers. We recently lost a hero in our movement, Christopher Hitchens. This year, we will walk in honor of his many accomplishments and his leadership within the free thought movement at the Light the Night Walk. The walk is held in local communities throughout the United States. This walk is organized by and benefits the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. You can sign up for the San Diego Walk on November 2nd with Team Coalition of Reason, and they have a booth out here tonight, or you can do it at the San Diego Coalition of Reason website. The Stiefel Free Thought Foundation will be matching our donations up to $500,000. Our goal is that freethinkers will be the largest single donor this year. It's about time we start demonstrating that we are, in fact, good without God. Of speakers from the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. First, we will hear from Executive Director of the United States branch of RDF, Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell, and then from Sean Faircloth, the RDF Director of Strategy and Policy, and finally from Richard Dawkins. Robin Elizabeth Cornwell is the Executive Director of the U.S. branch of Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. Her contributions include originating and expanding the OUT campaign and the Richard Dawkins website. She cut out most of her bio here and all across lines. Anyway, I had the pleasure of hearing her speak recently at the annual American Atheist Convention, and it was just marvelous. Please help me welcome Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. I'm going to speak a little about the OUT campaign this evening. It was a vision of the Richard Dawkins Foundation that has indeed become a successful meme. The purpose of the OUT campaign, is twofold. One part is to simply take the stigmatism out of atheism. The term atheism has been associated with a lot of negative things, especially during the McCarthy era, where atheism was, of course, connected with communism, and the two, of course, have actually no natural connection at all. But also to give atheism a positive image, not simply to take stigmatism away, but to make atheism something positive, to make it something that we can be proud of. So in 2006, the Richard Dawkins website was launched. The God delusion hits the New York Times bestsellers list, and atheism becomes kind of it's good, huh? And here we are 6 years later, and for the OUT campaign, the OUT campaign and the Scarlet A have in fact become an international symbol for atheism, for thinking, for rational thought. And for me personally, one of the most wonderful things I saw with the OUT campaign was the recent addition of the Afghan atheists, which their symbol is there on the bottom, which, when you think about it, what an amazingly brave group of people. And it is thrilling for me to know that they have joined our forces for reason and rationality and atheism. So the OUT campaign, there's sort of 5 basic components to it. One is to come out, to simply come out of the closet. We try to let people know you will feel liberated, you will feel good about coming out, and that you can encourage people to come out as well. Now, that does not mean we want anyone to out anyone and someone else. There's a lot of emotional issues that are attached to coming out as an atheist if someone's family is very religious, or living in some place where, in a small community, religion runs everything. And we know the pain and struggle. We hear stories all the time of people going through terrible emotional stress and strain, being kicked out of their family, parents not speaking to them. I heard a story just the other day of a young woman who lives in a small town, and when her mother sees her, she will run the other way, as will her much younger sister, because she has come out as an atheist. And one of the things with coming out, if you're able to, if you feel safe in coming out, it does help others realize that it's maybe not as scary as they think. And that's helpful. And that's part of what coming out is about. And it's to let people know that you can, being an atheist is just a small part of who we are. I mean, we're engineers, we're teachers, we're nurses, we're housewives, we're soccer moms, we work in every kind of industry, we have every type of education and every type of background. Another part of the OUT campaign is to just simply reach out. And that's reaching out again to other atheists as well as to theists, to let them know that, again, we're okay people. We're just like you. If you're a theist, you can say, I'm just like you, I just want to go one God further in not believing in the supernatural. You don't believe in Zeus and Thor. I just simply don't believe in the God that you do. And part of that is also reaching out to other parts of our community, the secular community, reaching out to women, to families, to children, to people who have been isolated by their families, and to reach out and give them a sense of community. We are, after all, a social species, and we have to remember that. And then speak out. And I think this is really important, and this will probably be the core of what we'll be talking about tonight. Speaking out. speaking out about what atheism actually means, speaking out about secularism, speaking out against the religious intrusion into government, into our schools, into education, into science, into just about every part of our lives, and most recently, invading a woman's womb. This is terrible what's happening now with women. We are stepping back in time to removing a woman's right to her own reproductive future. And keep religion out of government. Keep religion out of interfering with our lives. And stand up. Lead by example. We're all here in this room together. We're all here from various groups, from various backgrounds, and we all individually represent the secular and atheist communities, and we need to stand out. And sometimes that means we might try to be remember to be a little bit kinder, a little bit nicer, especially if we're wearing that A pin or have an atheist shirt on, is to, oh, it's nice to meet you, and thank you very much. And so give people the impression, to let them know that we really are good people, because we really are. One of the things I want to point out, though, about the whole OUT campaign and why it's important is because it can lead to other things. One thing I hear again and again and again that we complain about as a group, as a movement, is atheists can't be elected. Well, I don't think that's true. And in fact, in 1960s, if in the 1960s a presidential candidate had stood up and argued about he was more pious than the next person, or that his religion was more important in his life, and that he was going to be listening to God for his decisions on political decisions, he would have never been able to stand up on a platform in Republican debates. That would have never happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So what has changed? How did that happen? How did it happen that we're to this place now? Well, part of it is that the moral majority in the 1980s started working on a grassroots campaign to get where they are today. It was headed by Jerry Falwell, as you all know. He overtook the Christian Voice in the political arm of the evangelical church. He had lots of money. He had access to millions of followers already. And originally they backed Jimmy Carter, because Jimmy Carter was the first evangelical candidate for presidency, and he won. Unfortunately for the Christian right, but fortunately for us, Jimmy Carter, in fact, did not follow what the evangelicals really wanted him to do. In fact, he was much more like John F. Kennedy, where his religion was personal and was not part of his policy-making decisions. So the moral majority then, and they really galvanized, and they created, they organized, and they had goals and missions, and some of these missions were censorship. They wanted to censor what was going on in the media. They thought that we were moving away from traditional family values. They were opposed, of course, to gays and the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, the Strategic Arms Limitation talks. Why would they be against peace? I never quite figured that one out. But anyway, they were against it. And of course, they also wanted to convert people to their brand of Christianity. Those were their goals. So they organized to do that. And so they created the moral majority, and they had a lobbying arm to go lobby politicians. They had an arm that was dedicated to educating people on the political issues, especially ministers. So when the ministers went in on Sunday morning, they would talk about political issues such as gays and women and all the evils of the world that were coming onto America because of secularism. And they also created a legal defense fund, incredibly well funded, and they had lawyers fighting every step of the way to try to get Christianity in students to schools in various ways by taking evolution out and science out and true education out, and to help destroy the public school system, which of course is one of the goals of the Christian right. And of course they also had the Political Action Committee, which was to support candidates. Now, they had some failures over this plan. They did not destroy gay rights. Gays still have a ways to go, but they're getting there. SALT I and SALT II treaties, unfortunately they passed. However, they have completely destroyed any hope of the Equal Rights Amendment ever passing. In fact, I haven't heard of anyone suggesting the ERA ever be voted on again. It's completely dead in the water. And they have been, as we recently have seen, extraordinarily good at getting political candidates out there. Most recently, in 2012, this was a quote by Rob Stein. He's a strategist for the Democratic Party, and he said, quote, "The Christian activist right is the largest, best organized, and I believe the most powerful force in American politics today. No other political group comes even close." That should galvanize all of us to do something. And so here we are in 2012. We're not happy, but are we not happy enough to get on our feet and work hard and organize and do the things that we need to do so that we're the ones who are influencing politicians? We're the ones who are saying, pushing the moral majority back and telling them they are not moral, that they aren't, and make them defend their position. So that's what we need to do. See? We have a voice in the crowd that completely agrees. Thank you very much. I want us to be a secular voting bloc. Not an atheist voting bloc, a secular voting bloc, because this means we also can bring in theists, because there are a lot of theists who agree with us on this issue in particular. Now, we are growing in numbers. We have meetup groups, we have local, state, and national organizations. I'm seeing more and more young people, more and more women, more and more minorities. And we're seeing more awareness, billboards, media exposure, controversy. We're seeing a lot more of that the religious right are on the defensive. Isn't that nice to know? Isn't it nice to see them becoming a little bit worried that we're here? And most recently, we just had the Reason Rally. How many were any of you there at the Reason Rally? And wasn't that amazing? Seeing that crowd on the mall and seeing us all together and in the rain doing something. So we need to form our political voices. We need to form a united voice to keep religion out of politics. We need to be there at a local, state, and national level. We need to show that secularism is bipartisan. This is not a liberal issue. All parties need to understand that secularism is important. I bet there's a lot of very conservative Republicans that would love to see the religious right out of their politics. We have to make ourselves known, and we have to align ourselves, as I said, with other secularists, that this is not an atheist issue. So what's the main thing we have to do? We have to organize. And together, I think we can return to our secular traditions, and they are our secular traditions. Secularism is the true American tradition, and we need to remind people. We can elect secular and atheist candidates to public office. I truly believe that. And we can organize and organize and organize, and that's what we need to do. And that, we need to have that lobbying arm. We need to get involved in education. And if you can't be elected, if you're not willing to run for public office, go to your school board meetings, your local school board meetings. You don't have to have a child there. You, as we have to be concerned about education. It doesn't matter if you have children or not, or if your children are grown. Education is the only way that we will keep this democracy running. And when we see candidates, presidential candidates, publicly speak out about their goal is to destroy public education, we have to fight back. But we need to build them even stronger, and we need to have political action committees, and we need to support candidates, and we need to be vocal, and we need to be out there and say, we are not putting up with the stuff that's going on with these religious wingnuts. And that brings me to our next speaker, Sean Faircloth, who is our Director of Strategy and Policy. He is a critical part of the Richard Dawkins Foundation, and we are just wrapping up a 3-week tour. It feels sometimes like about 3 years, but we're wrapping up this wonderful tour around the United States. It started with the Reason Rally and has gone around to the Fort Bragg, Rockford, up in Seattle, and down here in San Diego. And it's been incredibly inspiring hearing Sean speak. And he has been a politician and a lawyer for many years. Don't hold that against him. He's a really good guy. And he has written a book called Attack of the Theocrats, and it's out there for sale. I hope you will buy at least 2 copies, one for yourself and one to give away. He will be signing afterwards. But in this book, he outlines the 10-point vision for a secular America. And I think that in looking at that vision, we can get a real idea of how we can organize, how we can develop a grassroots movement. Because we saw with the OUT campaign, the OUT campaign was truly a grassroots movement. There was not a lot of money behind it. It was just people putting it on their webpage, on their Facebook, tweeting it, letting people know about it, and here we are, not very many years later. So we can do it. We have the ability to do it. So what I would like to do now is ask you to please welcome Sean Faircloth and give him a big round of applause.
Professor Gormal was being modest. The OUT campaign was her idea, and when you have people in Afghanistan speaking out, and you have people who are not cutting off anyone's noses or throwing hot boiling water in anyone's face because of fundamentalist religion. Thank her for that. Now, if you believe in the separation of church and state, if you believe in the values of Jefferson and Madison, then you are my boss and I work for you. You gotta stand up for the values. Richard Dawkins asked me to work on your behalf on secular policy framing and strategy in Washington, D.C., and on secular organizing in every single state of the Union. Now, I've heard a naughty rumor that Professor Dawkins, in his most recent book, implies that certain passages of the Bible may not be 100% accurate. But you can just ignore that book, because I've been to the Creation Museum in Kentucky. And I know how the dinosaurs got on the ark. It was because they were baby dinosaurs. It says so on a plaque at the Creation Museum, so it must be true. Now, Noah's story is very, very important to American public policy today. Yes, it is. Because Congressman John Shimkus, in an official hearing of the United States Congress regarding the issue of global warming and the seas rising as a result of global warming, said that you don't need to worry about those seas rising. Because in the Bible, it says, one flood, Noah's flood, that's it, game over. Thank you, Congressman Shimkus, for that bit of scientific. education. Now, at first you might say to yourself, Congressman Shimkus, he's a punchline, a joke. Except that Congressman Shimkus is one of 535 people who make decisions for 300 million Americans. And in my book, I write a chapter called The Fundamentalist 50. He's one. But really, I only use Fundamentalist 50 because I liked the alliteration. I could have written Fundamentalist 150. That's what we're facing in this country, is people who, in their opinion, have great expertise on the Bible and are willing to impose that expertise on you and you and you based on American law. Now, that's one thing I won't offer to you as much expertise on the Bible, because I don't really know that much about the Bible if you really want to know the truth. In fact, about as much as I ever learned the Bible was one time I got a gift of the Children's Bible when I was about 12 years old. Some of you may be familiar with this volume. It had kind of a fake leather-looking cover with the red and purple lettering on the front. And I was on summer vacation with my folks, fighting with my sister about who was in the right side of the back seat of the car. And I thought, well, I'm going to read this Bible. And we were out driving somewhere in, Nevada or Utah, so it felt quite biblical. And I was reading the Bible, and I got to the part in the Bible where God instructs Abraham to kill his son. And I learned that this is a good thing, that shows that Abraham is God-fearing. And I'm looking up at my dad in the driver's seat thinking, I hope he's not too God-fearing. This doesn't look too good from my perspective. But it was the first time that I had that question, that many of you may have experienced that question. Or I said to myself first, would a moral God, even as a test, suggest to someone that they kill their own child? And would a moral person even consider a suggestion from a God or anybody else to kill their own child? And beyond that, would it be moral to think of children as property, as some form of chattel that can be used for religious purposes? Well, that's an ancient story, and we should all know it as part of our culture. But I want to tell you a true story from the 21st century in the United States of America. There was a little girl named Amia White. She was 2 years old. And Amia White, like most children that age in America today, she went to child care. And Amia White, at this child care, they lost track of her. And she was left alone in a van in the sun in Alabama in the summertime for 2 hours. And after 2 hours, little Amia White's heart gave out. And she died alone in that van. And on the outside of the van were painted the words Holy Church, because Amia White attended a religious child care, and I want you to picture 2 child cares side by side in the state of Alabama, one secular, one religious. The secular child care has to obey food safety regulations, has to obey medication segregation regulations, has to have staff training, has to have child-staff ratios, it has to be subject to unannounced state inspections. All the health and safety laws that apply to the secular child care in the state of Alabama, the religious child care is completely exempt. Now, you don't need to worry, because the head of the Alabama Christian Coalition said, hey, the pastors in their congregations, they're our quality control. And to be fair, maybe Amia White's death was a fluke, an anomaly. Except that there was a boy named Demyron Lindley. He was 3 years old, and he was left alone in a van in the sun in an Alabama religious child care for 10 hours. And then he died, alone in that van. Now, deaths are very rare, but much more common are children rampantly neglected, fly-by-night operations that simply say they're religious so they can exempt themselves from state law. That's happening in the 21st century in the United States of America. Now, I want to tell you another ancient story. This is a true one, from the Incas. The Incas had a ceremony. They would take children about 500 years ago in the pre-Columbian take them up to the mountains, and they would kill them as a sacrifice to their gods. It was part of their religious tradition. But that was 5 centuries ago. And they did drug the children first, and they did kill them rather swiftly. I want you to contrast that with something that happened in the 21st century in the United States of America. There was a 15-year-old girl named Jessica Crank. Jessica had a tumor growing on her shoulder. Now, it was a perfectly treatable tumor with modern medical science, except that Jessica's mother didn't believe in modern medical science. She believed in so-called faith healing, and there's a law in the state of Tennessee where they live that gives greater leniency to so-called faith healing families with regard to medical neglect of their children. And the tumor grew on Jessica Crank's shoulder, and it grew, and it grew, until it was literally, not figuratively, literally the size of a basketball on this girl's shoulder. She suffered horrible, agonizing, torturous pain, and then she died. That happened in the 21st century in the United States of America. There are people in this room who probably spoke out against torture at Abu Ghraib, and I commend you for doing so, but nothing that happened at Abu Ghraib was as horrific as what happened to Jessica Crank, and ultimately leading to her death. Where were the right to life groups on this issue? Where were they? And for that matter, where were we? Why weren't we out protesting? Why weren't we out speaking out? Now, I have just given you 2 examples. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, Alabama, Tennessee. In the case of faith healing laws, over 35 states have some form of separate standard regarding so-called faith healing in this country. So when I talk about just these 2 examples, in my book I document dozens of examples. Thank you for coming. And I appreciate you being here. You'll hear from Mr. Dawkins. And for those people, you will see dozens of examples of people who are harmed. People who are harmed by laws that have bias for religion in American government and law. And we at the Richard Dawkins Foundation, under the leadership of Dr. Cornwell, focus on organizing to do something about it. And in service to that goal, I offer a 10-point vision of a secular America, or as I call it, a modest plan to take over the United States. I hope you're with me. Our military should serve and include all Americans, religious and non-religious, with no hint of bias and with no hint of fundamentalist extremism coloring our military decisions at home or abroad. You know, see this man right here, Stephen Hill? He was booed at a Republican Tea Party debate because he is a gay serviceman. Well, we respect all of our men and women in uniform, including those in this room. Let's give them a round of applause. That relates to reproductive health or intimate sexual decisions shall be based on science and public health, not on religious bias or the denigration of women or sexual minorities. Let's stand up. Healthcare professionals shall fulfill their ethical and professional duties and serve the needs of their patients. They shall not turn people away like that fundamentalist pharmacist did in the state of Arizona. They shall fulfill their professional oath or they shall find another job. No bias based on religion or lack thereof in land use planning or environmental law or employment. We must stand up for that. It is wrong in America to discriminate based on religious viewpoint. Let us stand up for that principle. Marriage can be defined by a religious congregation, howsoever they choose, within their own congregation. As to American law, there shall be no religious bias in American law. crusader Ted Haggard, who preaches against gay sex while having gay sex on meth? Or George Takei, who's been with his husband since 1986. Principle number 6, when facing end-of-life choices, all Americans shall be guaranteed control over their own bodies without being forced back. Shall never be subjected to religious bias in education. The composition of our Congress and legislatures shall include secular Americans. And look at what we've been getting and compare it to people like Bill Gates. Bill Gates, who happens to not be religious and who goes out of his way to help his fellow citizens. Let's look at what we've been getting from this and compare it to this scary atheist, Brad Pitt, who keeps going back to New Orleans. And he's so popular because he brings his carpentry tools down there, helping now, even today, years after the flood, helping people in the Ninth Ward. They have signs up in New Orleans saying, Brad Pitt for mayor. And he says, well, I can't be mayor because I'm an atheist. Well, Brad Pitt's a decent guy, and I say also a pretty handsome one. I say he can run for public office. Principle number 9, there should be one consistent standard pertaining to the health and welfare of children, no matter the religion of a child's parents, school, or child care center. Religious extremists can do whatever they want with their own body, but children should be maintained with human rights for every life. Medical, technical, and scientific innovation shall be dedicated to the health and advancement of our fellow citizens and must never be impeded by religious bias. We can do something about Parkinson's disease. We can do something about spinal cord injury if we are not impeded by religious bias. These values are not abstract. In addition to our 10-point vision, we offer a specific strategic plan. It's called our secular decade, and I said our secular decade. It's not our secular 2 weeks. It's not our secular Facebook post. It's, although the Facebook posts are welcome. The first thing you can do to change the world is to go have a drink right around the corner at the keg room at the Yard House, where there's going to be a Dawkins party sign. And let me be clear, Richard Dawkins will not be there. We don't want the place mobbed. But I'm thinking you should be there, because I think there is someone in this room. There is a webmaster in this room who can connect secular groups statewide in California and can connect them to richarddawkins.net. We want that person there after this event. There is an organizer in this room who could help organize a once-a-year statewide secular conference. Because I tell you, Texas already has one. Do you Californians want to be behind Texas? Come on now. There is someone in this room who can raise money, not just for Richard Dawkins Foundation, but for every single group that's listed on the San Diego Coalition of Reason website. We need to raise money for them, and we need to raise money for a secular lobbyist in Sacramento and to your California federal elected officials, because, by the way, they've already done it in Arizona. Do Californians want to really be behind Arizona? We've got to speak out for that. So go to have a drink after this event, but then stay connected and organize for a secular cause. You know, my folks, my parents, are here this evening. And in my parents' youth, there were giants that walked on this earth. One giant was 5'6", and his name was Martin Luther King. And another giant was 5'9", and his name was Robert Kennedy. And when these giants walked the earth, they used the word morality all the time. And when they used the word morality, it had to do with the underprivileged. It had to do with the dispossessed. It had to do with those who were suffering. It had to do with those who were marginalized. That's what morality really means, and we need to stand up for that kind of morality. was in politics in Maine, and I offered the religious right a dose of small-town traditional values. It goes something like this. Mind your own business. Mind your own business. I'm devoting my 20 years of political experience to this cause, and I'm ready to do a grassroots training with you, because I'm going to Sarah Palin's Alaska, I'm going to be going to Michelle Bachmann's Minnesota, and I'm going to be going to Rick Santorum's Pennsylvania. And you know what? Together, all of us, we are going to bring back James Madison's Constitution. That's what we're going to bring back. Jefferson's First Amendment, and we are going to bring back Jack Kennedy's America. Jack Kennedy's America, where in his words, the separation of church and state is, quote, absolute. That's what we're going to stand. Because in thousands upon thousands of generations of our species, we are so lucky because we're in this last sliver of time when we get to benefit from the ideals of the Enlightenment and the scientific method. It was Thomas Jefferson, the scientist, who said, the main object of all science, freedom and happiness, are the sole objects of legitimate government. It is the proudest boast to say you are willing to stand tall for the values of the Enlightenment, as everyone in this room does. It is a proud boast. It is a proud boast to stand up for the principle that no ancient document can take away any person's human rights. We all stand up for that. It is true today that the religious right has veto power over one of two major political parties in the most powerful nation on earth. But the path to justice does not lie with the forces of fundamentalism and their seductive simplicity of certainty. No, the path of justice rather lies with the continuing commitment to question. That is where the path of justice lies. We not need fear this so-called angry atheism. What we need to fear is the fanatical fundamentalist. That's what we need to fear. And I'll tell you what, when I first got this job, I heard these rumors about this Richard Dawkins guy, that he was the strident one. That's what I heard. And, he might bite my head off. Well, what will it be like working for him? But on this last night of our U.S. tour, I must say this, that the man I've gotten to know reminds me of what Churchill said about Franklin Roosevelt. Meeting him is like opening your first bottle of champagne, and knowing him is like drinking it. This is a guy who is always there with a kind word and with a great story. And Richard Dawkins will continue to be attacked because of his unflinching honesty, but that is the reason why he inspires so many of us. And if Richard Dawkins, a world-renowned scientist, can devote so much of his time and his effort to this cause, to the cause of Jefferson, then all of us Americans must devote our time as well. We must all do the same thing. And therefore, what better antidote to the fanatical fundamentalist than to the man I now introduce, the affable atheist, Richard Dawkins.
My talk is called Now Praise Intelligent Design. Daddy, don't go down quote mine. I have to add that last bit because, of course, now praise intelligent design is just asking for trouble. Just as the feminists have rallied around the phrase, take back the night, and just as less appealingly, the wingnuts have resolved to take back America, maybe we should take back intelligent design in the true sense of the word. Let's intelligently design our morality, rather than trying to read what's right and wrong in a 3,000-year-old book. Religion has hijacked morality for centuries. Let's take it back and intelligently design our morality. Let's intelligently design our lives rather than be dictated to by priests and mullahs. Let's intelligently design our future. The gift of foresight is ours, something that never existed before brains, for practical purposes human brains, evolved. Take back phrases like pro-life. It's been well said that for a religiously based Republican, life begins at conception and ends at birth. The real pro-lifers, people like Doctors Without Borders. Our foundation, under its arm called Non-Believers Giving Aid, raised over $500,000 for Haiti at the time of the earthquake from non-believers, which we sent to Doctors Without Borders and one other secular charity. Take back American values from those who have usurped them. For true American values, the values of Jefferson and Madison, as Sean Faircloth has said, the values of Thomas Paine and the Enlightenment. Take back spirituality, not under that word I suggest, but the idea of a sense of wonder when you look up at the Milky Way, hijacked by religion. They don't have a monopoly on poetic wonder at the glories of the universe. Even, perhaps a bit more trivially and facetiously, take back Christmas, the winter solstice festival, celebrated by the ancient Druids with mistletoe and holly, and later hijacked by the Christians. Religion even managed to hijack technology, when tribal peoples used to be impressed by missionaries who had telescopes and guns and compasses and things, and thought that these wonders of technology were the products of the Christian God, rather than of Western science. So back to the idea of intelligent design itself. The only entities in the universe capable of either intelligence or design are brains or equivalent computational devices. These are not supernatural, they're natural, and they come into existence by explicable processes, taking a long time, of which evolution by natural selection is the only one we know about. It may be the only one in the universe. But to talk of praising intelligent design is, of course, to run a gauntlet of potential quote-liners, which is the reason for my parenthetic rhyming subtitle. I'll return to that if I have time, which I may not. The ability to design is one of the crowning glories of our species. Bridges, planes, buildings, ingenious contraptions of all kinds. The essence of design, in this true sense of the word design, is deliberate foresight. The designer works on a blueprint, makes calculations of the likely effects of varying parts of the design, runs computer simulations, builds models, uses imagination, peers into the future, and asks the all-important what-if questions. But living bodies have an astonishing property to mimic design. A bird's wing looks designed. When an engineer analyzes the detailed anatomy of a wing or an eye, an ear, a red blood corpuscle, he's bowled over with admiration for how carefully calculated the details seem to be, as though calculated by a master engineer. In David Hume's words, all these various machines, and even their most minute parts, are adjusted to each other with an accuracy which ravishes into admiration all men who've ever contemplated them. The curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds, the productions of human contrivance, of human design, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. This illusion of design, of course, is what has misled generations of people to think that because it looks designed, it must be designed. It wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that we realized, thanks to Charles Darwin and a couple of others, that there is another way, a genuinely effective way, a way that works, in which apparently designed entities can come into being by purely natural, comprehensible processes. Evolution by natural selection. And now, of course, we understand that deliberate human design, what we might call true design, is itself a product of that older pseudo-design, which is natural selection, a product of brains which are put together over a long period by the old type of pseudo-design, natural selection. Let's call them paleo-design, the ancient pseudo-design, natural selection, and neo-design, the modern, true, deliberate, premeditated design, which did not come into existence until late in the universe when brains had evolved large size. I think it's rather a delightful thought that natural selection, having hit on so many pieces of good pseudo-design, paleo-designed devices, the eye, the wing, the ear, the joint, the heart, the sting, the lung, the neurone, the brain, should finally come up with a new device which actually mimics the process of natural selection itself and produce design 2, neo-design. The sort of design that makes bridges and planes, computers and cameras, can openers and adjustable spanners. Wrenches. I have to wrench my mind back into American English sometimes. So intelligence and design come late into the universe, but it's for a very principled reason, not just a matter of fact. The reason is that intelligent agents like brains and computers, entities capable of designing things, are necessarily complex. They're statistically improbable in a functional direction. Complex, statistically improbable things don't just happen spontaneously by luck. That's what statistically improbable means. This is the utterly mistaken basis for what is by far the commonest creationist objection to evolution. It's the generalization of the astronomer Fred Hoyle's Boeing 747 argument. Fred Hoyle said that a hurricane blowing through a junkyard will never assemble a Boeing 747, and by the same token, he thought that anything as complicated as a living organism, or indeed a molecule from a living organism, a macromolecule, couldn't come into existence by chance, by random luck. Well, of course it couldn't. That's the whole point of natural selection. Natural selection is not a random process. It's the very opposite of a random process. Randomness enters into it in the process of mutation, though even that's not random in every sense. Even mutation is only random in the sense that it is not directed towards improvement. Natural selection is directed towards improvement. Improvement in the special sense of becoming better at surviving, or more poignantly, reproducing. Sometimes neo-design can be better than paleo-design. Sometimes paleo-design has revealing flaws that show it up for what it is. The most telling example I know is the recurrent laryngeal nerve, for example, in a giraffe, although any mammal would do. The recurrent laryngeal nerve is it's a branch of one of the cranial nerves. It starts in the brain, and it goes to the larynx, it goes to the voice box. But it doesn't go straight to the voice box. It shoots down the neck, straight past the voice box, down into the chest, loops its way straight around one of the main arteries in the chest, and then it goes straight back up again to the larynx, which is its end organ. I took part, as part of a television program, in a dissection of the neck of a giraffe. It was a very wonderful experience for me. And we actually, I didn't, but I sort of assisted at dissecting out this remarkable nerve. And in a giraffe, the detour of the recurrent laryngeal nerve is about 15 feet. It's about 15 feet longer than it should be if it was well designed, if it was intelligently designed. You actually see the nerve going within an inch of the voice box, which is its target organ, going way, way, way down the giraffe's neck into the chest, turning around again and coming straight back up again. No engineer worth his salt would do something like that. And you know the same is true of the vertebrate retina. Unlike the mollusk retina, the retina is backwards. The light-sensitive cells, which pick up the light, don't point towards the light, they point away from it. And the wires that connect them to the brain are in front of the light, in the way of the light. And they crisscross their way over the surface of the retina, presumably getting in the way of the light, and then dive through a hole, which is called the blind spot, and go back along the optic nerve to the brain. Bad design. Both those examples of bad design are entirely explicable once you factor in evolutionary history. In the case of the recurrent laryngeal nerve, for example, in our fish ancestors, the most direct route of the nerve which was to give rise to the recurrent, which was to become the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the most direct route to what was then the end organ was indeed behind that, the equivalent of that artery. And then in the evolution of the tetrapods, in the evolution of the mammals, as the neck got longer and longer and longer, fish don't have a neck, as the tetrapod neck, the mammal neck got longer and longer, the detour got minutely, generation by generation, longer as well. The marginal cost of each additional millimeter of detour was small compared to the marginal cost of the major embryological upheaval which it would have taken in order to jump the nerve over the artery. So the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the bad design of the recurrent laryngeal nerve, makes perfect sense in the light of history. And the same is true of the retina being backwards. When you think about it, it's actually remarkable that biological, quote, design is as good as it is. Because biological design cannot go back to the drawing board in the way that true intelligent design by human engineers can. It's as though you were condemned as an engineer to evolve the jet engine from the propeller engine by changing it one screw at a time, one rivet at a time, one nut at a time, instead of just throwing away the whole propeller engine and starting afresh with a clean drawing board. Imagine if engineers had to do that. Imagine if the designers of the jet engine had to evolve the jet engine step by tiny step from the propeller engine, and every step of the way had to fly and had to be a little bit better than the one before. No wonder living creatures are not perfectly designed. It's astonishing that they are as well designed, apparently, as they are. We, unlike evolution, can intelligently design the future. Natural selection does a really surprisingly good job at producing things that look as though they're very well designed. But the one thing natural selection cannot do is look into the future and take account of what might happen in the future. It has to favor short-term advantage at every step of the way. Every step of the way, it's the short-term advantage. The animal has to get a bit better than the previous generation. You cannot say, oh, well, we better sort of get a bit worse for the next million years because then we can get better again later and we'll be going up a better pathway, something of that sort. You can't do that. The great molecular biologist Sidney Brenner satirized that remarkably common error by imagining a protein which was present in the Cambrian era and wasn't much good in those days, but they hung on to it because it might come in handy in the Cretaceous. That cannot happen. It cannot happen that natural selection looks into the future. By the same token, natural selection never takes care of the species, never stops the species going extinct. If the species goes extinct as far as natural selection is concerned, that's just too bad. Natural selection does not favour species that don't go extinct. Natural selection favours the short-term advantage of individual animals and plants within a species. Humans, on the other hand, can look to the future. Humans can say, if we go on doing what we're doing for the next 100 years, global warming will have catastrophic results. We can do that kind of thing, but natural selection can't. We can design the future, we can look at the alternative, we can do a what-if calculation, we can look at what would happen if we do X rather than if we do Y, and we can take appropriate steps, theoretically. Of course, it's a different matter whether we can summon up the political unanimity to persuade a majority of people to accept those remedies. But at least we have the capacity to calculate what would be the best policy. Natural selection cannot do that. We can intelligently design the future. Evolution cannot. In the more distant future, we might be able to stop our species going extinct. I said that natural selection cannot take steps to stop the species going extinct. The dinosaurs were driven extinct by a very large meteorite or comet which collided with Earth 65 million years ago, releasing more energy, more catastrophic destructive energy than if you exploded all the hydrogen bombs in the world 100 times over simultaneously. There was probably a catastrophic nuclear winter. The dinosaurs, with the exception of the birds, were all driven extinct. The mammals managed to survive somehow, perhaps because they were hibernating underground. Such a catastrophe is almost bound to happen again. On average, these catastrophes probably happen every 20 or 30 million years, not regularly, but at random. We don't know when the next one's going to come. It could be now, but it's rather unlikely. But in the next century or so, it should be possible, assuming we haven't driven ourselves extinct by other means, it should be possible for humans to develop the technology not only to detect an approaching bolide of that sort, but also to actually intercept it, destroy it, or deflect it. Something, of course, the dinosaurs couldn't do. So we do have the power to intelligently design our future. We have the power to stop our species going extinct if we have the political will to do the right things. Reclaim morality, intelligently design our morality, our ethics. The idea of what's right and wrong has been hijacked by religion. We must take it back. The thought that we either do or should get our morals from the Bible is a sick joke. Sean has already mentioned the truly disgusting story of Abraham being all prepared to obey God's instruction to kill his son, just to prove how obedient he was to that monstrous God of the Old Testament. The Ten Commandments, which so many political figures in this country are trying to have hung up in courthouses and other public buildings, those people seldom actually know what the Ten Commandments are. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Is that really a moral principle we should be living by? At the time when that was written down, the Jews were polytheists, or had recently changed from polytheism. They believed that lots of gods existed, and they were under very strict instructions to worship only one of them, the jealous God. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. A moral principle to live by. Don't make any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Are there better things to worry about in our lives? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You may be familiar with the passage in Numbers 15:32, which I'll read to you. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation. And they put him in ward, because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall surely be put to death, and the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And the congregation brought him without the camp, and stoned him with stones, and he died, as the Lord commanded Moses. What a wonderful moral God! Honour thy father and thy mother. That's rather a good one. But now listen to Jesus. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Luke 14:26. Well, finally, we come to what you might call the good commandments. There are not very many of them. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, and so on. Thou shalt not kill. Well, that's a pretty good motto. But you may remember Christopher Hitchens' sarcastic remark saying, roughly, Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets, and the Israelites said something like, well, I like to imagine it in John Cleese's voice. Oh, I see! Thou shalt not kill! Oh, how silly of me! We all thought it was a terrific idea to kill. Now we know better. Oh, silly me! Anybody who has ever read the Old Testament will certainly not wish to get their morals from it. And if you meet anybody who gets his morals from the Old Testament, I think you'd be wise to give him a wide berth. But it's not just the Old Testament. The New Testament is just as bad. The odious doctrine of the redemption of sins by Jesus. This is not Jesus' own doctrine, by the way. This is St. Paul. I used to know a very distinguished scholar of ancient history whose life's work was to try to decide whether Plato or St. Paul was the greatest shit of all time. The doctrine of the redemption of original sin is roughly like this. God, the creator of the universe, the deviser of the laws of physics, of quantum mechanics and relativity, this genius God couldn't think of a better way to forgive our sins than to come down to earth as his outer ego, his son, and have himself hideously tortured and executed so that he could forgive himself on behalf of all mankind, including future people, whether or not they actually intended to sin when their time finally came. Actually, according to Christian theology, it doesn't matter whether you personally sin, because whether you sin or not, you are born in sin. You inherit the sin of Adam. Adam, who we now know, of course, never existed. You inherit the sin of Adam, and it comes down to you, according to St. Augustine, via the semen of all your male ancestors since Adam. What a disgusting doctrine! We are all born in sin because of our remote ancestor Adam, who never existed, and the doctrine of original sin still goes on, even in churches such as the Roman Catholic Church, which presumably accepts that Adam never existed. It's typical, by the way, of the theological mind, even the so-called sophisticated theological mind, that even when it's given up factual belief, such as in Adam, it carries on with the symbolism as though nothing had happened. It doesn't matter if the facts are disproved, you rescue them by turning them into symbols or metaphors or parables. Well, we better not get our morals from the New Testament either, or the Quran for that matter. I suppose the other way in which you might think you could get your morals from religion would be fear of the divine spy camera in the sky. Fear that God will send you to hell. That when you're boiling in the lake of fire and your skin burns off, you probably grow another skin so that you can feel the agony all over again. There seems to be a sort of inverse relationship between the plausibility of a punishment and its terribleness. If the idea of hell were remotely plausible, then it wouldn't have to be so horrible as it actually is. And sucking up to God in the hope of going to heaven is just about as bad, just about as ignoble a reason for being moral. I think it was one of the church fathers, probably Tertullian, who said, so that the saved may enjoy themselves, that's not quite the right words, in heaven they are permitted to watch the suffering of the damned. Well, we shouldn't then get our morals from religion, and as a matter of fact we don't. There's a changing moral zeitgeist. We, in the early 21st century, have the characteristic moral attitudes of the early 21st century. Some of us a little bit more progressive than others. But anybody living in the United States today, or in Britain today, in the 21st century, has an understanding of morality, of ethics, which labels us as of our time. If you were to go back a century or 2 centuries, maybe as little as half a century, you would find that the people there were labelled in a different way. They were labelled as the beginning of the 20th century or the beginning of the 19th century. In the early 19th century, most people in Britain and America were probably in favour of slavery, for example. Progressive ones weren't. Charles Darwin was among the more progressive ones. He and his family were passionately against slavery, and he had a very fierce argument with Captain Fitzroy on the Beagle because of it. Fitzroy was of his time and believed in slavery, and they were not on speaking terms for quite a long time because of this. But my point is this, that people in Darwin's time, Darwin was progressive, Fitzroy was not so progressive, but they were both of them of their time in the early 19th century. The moral zeitgeist moves on. Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's great friend and bulldog, was very much in the vanguard of his time. He was a liberal, he was a progressive, he was right on in what we would now call the left wing. But Huxley had no hesitation in saying that black people were clearly and obviously inferior to white people. In other words, somebody in the vanguard of liberal progressive opinion in the mid-19th century would have been regarded as a terrible right-wing reactionary if he were alive in our time. My point is this, that morals and ethics are labelled as of their time. It has nothing to do with religion. We get our morals from the fact that we live in the 21st century, or in the 1950s, or in the 1900s, wherever a person happens to be born. It's that gives him or her the morals of the time, give or take a little bit of difference between individuals. We don't need religion to give us our morals. We shouldn't get our morals from religion, but as a matter of fact, we don't. We even have evidence on this from a opinion polls, and this is rather in my head at the moment because quite recently the British branch of the Richard Dawkins Foundation, which is legally quite independent of the American branch, conducted an opinion poll of the British people. And the reason we did this is that every 10 years there's a national census in Britain, and it's been the custom for the census to ask people to tick a box, the religion box, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, etc., or no religion. In 2001, the census showed that 72% of the British people recorded themselves as Christian. And that figure of 72% has been used during the intervening 10 years by politicians, by priests, by bishops, to argue that Britain is a Christian country and therefore should abide by Christian values and Christian morals, which often means biblical. We in the British Richard Dawkins Foundation doubted that this was a valid thing to do. We joined other groups in trying to get the religion question removed from the 2011 census. We failed on that. The religion question was in there. So we fell back on Plan B, which was to commission an opinion poll from a reputable polling organisation in the very week after the census. So we were really sampling at the same time as the census. And we particularly wanted to know the deeper opinions and beliefs of the people who ticked the Christian box in the census. So our first question was, did you tick the Christian box? And the answer to that was, the actual results of the census have not yet been published, but our opinion poll indicates that the number ticking the Christian box has dropped in the 10 years since 2001, has dropped from 72% to 54%. So that's a good result. More interestingly, we then took that 54%, the people who tick the Christian box, and asked them supplementary questions to see what they really believed, in particular, what was their attitude to morality. By the way, it turned out that the 54% are not, the majority of them are not really what you might call Christian. They don't go to church, they don't read the Bible, they don't know what the first book of the New Testament even is. And when we asked them, why did you tick the Christian box? We offered them a choice. Is it because you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Saviour? Is it because you believe the teachings of Jesus and so on? The most popular answer to why did you tick the Christian box was, well, I like to think of myself as a good person. Let that sink in a bit. That's a reason for saying that you're a Christian. It's an insult not only to atheists, but to Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus, etc. as well. Then we asked another question of these people. Again, remember the 54% who tick the Christian box. We asked them, when you face a moral dilemma, when you face a question of right and wrong, do you turn to your religion? And only 10% said yes. So as a matter of fact, they don't turn to their religion, even if they call themselves Christian. 10% of the 54%, note, not 10% of the British population, 10% of the 54% who, probably in most cases mistakenly, call themselves Christian. The most popular answer to when you face a moral dilemma, which way do you turn, was, I turn to my innate sense of right and wrong, which of course is what we all do. So we don't turn to religion for right and wrong, and we shouldn't. What should we do? Well, intelligently designing morals is what moral philosophers do. And I put up a distinction there between absolutist moral philosophers, who are mostly religious, and consequentialist moral philosophers, who believe that what is wrong is what does harm, damage, causes suffering. An absolutist, mostly religious people, will say, it's just wrong, end of story, no argument, no need to justify it, it's just plain wrong. For example, in the case of abortion, an absolutist will say, abortion is wrong, abortion is murder, if you kill an embryo, it's equivalent to murdering a person, so we go and shoot some doctors who do abortions. The consequentialist instead would say, does the embryo suffer? Who suffers when an abortion is done? Who suffers when an abortion is not done? Is the sum total of human happiness increased or decreased, given the situation that a woman may find herself in? Does the embryo suffer? Well, the early embryos I put up there, which would be something like an 8 or 16 cell embryo, of course it doesn't suffer. It's got no nervous system. It doesn't suffer any more than a lettuce or a potato would beat it. You might have more misgivings about a later fetus. Does a later embryo suffer? Well, it's possible, because by then it's got a nervous system, and you certainly need a nervous system in order to suffer. But however much it may suffer, it surely suffers a lot less than a pig or a lamb or a cow when you slaughter it and raise it in a factory farm and eat it for meat. So absolutist morality, which is not intelligently designed, says abortion is murder, end of story. They worry a lot about a thing they call personhood. When does personhood begin? And they will say personhood begins at conception. That would be the Roman Catholic doctrine, for example. The next time somebody tells you that, go and find some identical twins, or I put up some identical triplets there. Identical twins or identical triplets split after conception. Which twin got the soul? Which triplet got the personhood, as opposed to being presumably some kind of zombie? Euthanasia or assisted suicide of the mortally ill who suffer and have no further interest in life. Absolutist morality simply asserts that killing humans is wrong, end of story. Intelligently designed morality asks whether suffering is decreased. But intelligently designed morality is also mindful of possible risks, slippery slopes. What if the very ill person doesn't really want to die, but is pushed into it by relatives, greedy to inherit wealth? Those are questions which a consequentialist and an intelligently designed moralist would have to consider, but having considered them, might put in place adequate safeguards to stop it being abused. There's a rather good argument that says that assisted suicide might actually might actually prolong life in a paradoxical way. If a very unhappy person, or a person who fears that they are going to become very unhappy when they get a bit older, they know that when they get older they will be incapable, physically incapable of committing suicide. And if they know that they cannot get help when they reach the point where they would like to die, they may take the step now while they still have their faculties and their powers to kill themselves, thereby in fact shortening their life when they might have had another 5 years, another 10 years of perhaps quite happy life, because they're afraid of going past the point of no return when they'll no longer be able to do it. And somebody close to me has actually been in that position and done it. Stem cell cloning, the so-called moral objection to that is purely based upon the fact that embryos, actually very, very early embryos, long before they develop a nervous system and can suffer pain, are involved. Another possible objection is that it opens up a slippery slope to reproductive cloning, and absolutist moralists have a horror of actually cloning a whole human being, like Dolly the lamb. And so, once again, they don't give reason, they don't have to give reasons, they just more or less say yuck. cloning is horrible, is reprehensible, is playing God, is the phrase they often use. Intelligently designed morality might object to whole organism cloning, perhaps on slippery slope grounds, perhaps on grounds of suffering of the first clone. The first clone baby might be subject to merciless hounding by the tabloid press, the National Enquirer, or the British equivalents, which are even worse. And there's also the suspicion, which is similar to the one we saw in the case of the identical twins. There are people who don't understand what cloning means, and they believe that a cloned human being would have no soul, would have no personhood, and we've already seen the objection to that. Identical twins are just clones. Might we one day intelligently design ourselves or design our children? We already sort of design our children when we educate them and decide on the kind of education we want for them. Somebody who wants their child to be a budding Mozart might well force the child to have music lessons, whether the child wants it or not. Well, that is a kind of intelligent design of your child, and it's not one that most people object to. What people do object to is, of course, intelligent design of the genome of your child, designer babies. Most sensible people have no problem with negative eugenics. For example, when there's a risk, a known risk of a terrible genetic disease like Huntington's chorea, if, like Woody Guthrie, you have Huntington's chorea, it's a dominant gene, it's fatal, it's lethal at some time in middle age, any child of Woody Guthrie would have known that he had a 50% chance of inheriting this dominant gene and it would kill him. Well, we can do something about that. We can intelligently design babies so that they don't have Huntington's chorea. And if an adult who has Huntington's chorea wishes to have a baby, what they can do is do it by IVF, and then at a very early stage, take one sample cell from the embryo. One sample cell is enough to look at its DNA, and when you do IVF, you take quite a number of eggs from the woman and fertilize them all. So roughly half the eggs that you take from a woman will have the lethal gene, and the other half won't. So you simply choose one that doesn't have the lethal gene to implant back into the woman, and you've cleaned out Huntington's chorea or haemophilia, whatever it might be, in a single generation. That kind of negative eugenics, it seems very hard to object to, yet you'll find absolutist moralists who certainly would object. Positive eugenics is another matter. Positive eugenics meaning you're actually trying to breed for positively, trying to make brilliant musicians or brilliant mathematicians or brilliant high jumpers or brilliant sprinters or something of that sort. A lot of people object to that, and the consequentialist objections are there too. I'm not saying that it's only absolutists who object to positive eugenics, but we need to look at what the objections are. First objection is Hitler tried to do it. Well, it's not actually an objection. You have to ask, okay, Hitler did a lot of terrible things, but nevertheless we could ask whether it was, whether positive eugenics is necessarily bad. It's not bad simply because Hitler tried to do it. How do you decide, and who is allowed to decide what you breed for? This is rather more difficult. Certainly the way Hitler did it, which was that the government decided what to breed for. You breed for tall, blonde, blue-eyed so-called Aryans. I think almost everybody's going to object to that, but not everybody objects to the idea of parents themselves choosing the kind of genes they want for their child. I think there are great objections to that as well, and consequentialist moralists, intelligently designing moralists, should take account of them too. But it is worth remarking that it's not in principle very different from designing your children by education. Designing the genes of your child is different from designing your child by education, but it isn't obvious why one of them is laudable and the other one isn't. We have, of course, been doing positive eugenics in domestic animals and plants for millennia. We've been selecting cabbages and wheat plants and maize plants and racehorses and so on, dogs, for many, many centuries. We've been doing it with the natural selection, actually artificial selection part of the Darwinian equation. And in the future, it may be possible to do the same thing with the mutation part of the Darwinian equation, that's to say, genetic manipulation. Finally, are religions themselves intelligently designed? Well, one or two of them definitely are. We know that L. Ron Hubbard designed Scientology, and we have his remarkably frank confession of why he did it. It was to make money. Possibly, we could say that Mormonism was intelligently designed by Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith, I don't know whether he was intelligent, he was an obvious charlatan. Actually, I think a convicted crook, wasn't he? And he did manage to persuade people he must have had very great powers of persuasion, because he managed to persuade people that he had dug up some golden tablets with some funny writing on, which he was able to translate with the age of a magic stone in a hat. People believed that, and one of your presidential candidates today believes that. The fact that he invented it so recently enables us to make at least the probable case that it was a designed religion. It didn't just happen, it didn't just spontaneously spring into existence. The fact he was a charlatan is borne out, by the way, by the fact that he, although a 19th century man, translated the alleged tablets into 16th century English. Why would an honest person ever do a thing like that? One could make the case that Christianity was intelligently designed by St. Paul, and that's probably going back too far in history to be sure. If religions are not intelligently designed, might they come about by something like evolution, the way wings and hearts and eyes come into existence? Well, there are various kinds of evolutionary process that we might invoke. The standard Darwinian one involves the differential survival of genes, natural selection of genes, ordinary natural selection producing religiosity. And there have been arguments that religious people actually survive better than non-religious people. And it's not totally impossible that that's true. It could be that psychosomatic diseases of stress, might be alleviated by religious belief. People who have religious belief might be less prone to, I don't know, duodenal ulcers or something of that sort. There's a very little evidence for that. It's not very persuasive. Another suggestion that's been made is group selection. Group selection is an idea that is pushed by some biologists who, in my opinion, don't really understand how natural selection works. But I haven't time to elaborate on that. It's not difficult to make a reasonably plausible case that some religions survive better than other religions because they have what it takes to survive. I mean, a religion that has a very warlike God that causes its followers to rampage around the world, conquering other people and forcing them to adopt their religion, which is how Islam got going. That such a religion might indeed have good survival value if you like to think of the unit of natural selection as being the whole religion. I don't think that's very close to a Darwinian process. I think that's rather more close to what biologists would call ecological succession. It's analogous to what happened when the grey squirrel was introduced from America into Britain and wiped out the red squirrel. There are a few redoubts of red squirrels still left, but it's the grey squirrel simply outcompeted them, and that well, that's possible that that's how religions displace other religions, but that doesn't seem to me to explain why individuals follow religions in the first place. If we're going to have a Darwinian view of religion, then I think the best, my favourite version of a Darwinian theory of how religions might actually evolve is that religious ideas themselves, what you might call memes, survive better in the population than other rival memes. So an idea like life after death might survive because it's attractive, because people like the idea, and people believe what they want to believe. That would be a mimetic theory of religion. And I think that's, if you must try to devise a Darwinian theory of the evolution of religion, that might be one way of doing it, the natural selection of ideas or memes within the population. But finally, coming back to gene selection, I think perhaps what we should think of is not that there's natural selection in favour of religiosity itself, as I did when I talked about duty and ulcers, but rather that natural selection might favour certain psychological predispositions, like, say, a tendency to obey authority. And the psychological predispositions manifest themselves in the form of religion under the appropriate cultural conditions. Well, I think I've been talking long enough, and I would like to stop now and take questions, so thank you very much indeed.
Hello, Richard Dawkins.
Where are you?
Right here. So today, much of the world is celebrating Good Friday, the day when Jesus died to show us love. And yes, God absolutely loves you too, Richard Dawkins. I do have a question. Can I take 30 seconds to fix it?
Ask a question.
That's interesting for an open-minded group. I do want to ask a question.
Please ask a question.
That's interesting. I don't see much love. That's the question. Is natural selection and survival of the fittest comes against the attributes of the Lamb that was slain? The love of Jesus. I was too an atheist, and I want to give you an opportunity to define your morality and convince me that your morality is better than the Lamb that was slain for me.
Thank you. Well, I thought I'd actually rather dealt with that question. The lamb that was slain for you, I thought I'd rather make the case that that's rather a revolting idea. However, I don't want to say that all of what Jesus himself said, he never said he was slain for you, it was only Paul who said that. Some of the morality that Jesus said, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount is admirable. Turn the other cheek and things like that, do as you would be done by, blessed are the peacemakers and so on. But these are ideas which would occur to any decent person of a consequentialist persuasion. This is the kind of idea. This is the kind of idea which we would wish to come up with, if we had indeed intelligently designed morality. I thought at the beginning of your question there was a suggestion of denigrating Darwinian natural selection as producing morality. And of course, you're right there that natural selection, if we abode by the principles of Darwinism in naive form, if we were as selfish and as ruthless as a naive interpretation of Darwinism might prescribe, then indeed we would be very nasty people. One of the aspects of intelligently designing morality is precisely to leave behind the kind of morality which a naive interpretation of Darwinism would foster. I am a passionate Darwinian when it comes to explaining our existence and the existence of all life. I am a passionate anti-Darwinian when it comes to designing morality and designing the sort of society in which we want to live. We do not wish to live in a Darwinian society. A Darwinian society would be a sort of Thatcherite, Reaganite. Yes. Next question.
Good evening. You're an inspiration. Keeping in mind homeopathy, faith healing, creationism, intelligent design, and prohibitions on stem cell research, do you feel that there should be more stringent legal protections for science, scientific research, scientific education, scientific popularization, possibly in the form of a constitutional amendment?
Is Sean around? Can I deflect this question onto Sean Faircloth?
I admire the thought, but I don't know that that's how it would work. But I think, frankly, although it's going to take years and years of work, is that people who are non-religious and people who are religious who believe in the separation of church and state actually follow the principles of Jefferson and Madison and vote people into office who believe in thinking and rational government. And that's going to take years, but that brings it back to what I'm hoping I see from people in this room, especially the young people in this room. I'm going to turn it back to Richard here a minute, but I would ask the young people in this room to go to that pub event, not just to have a beer, but to talk about when you are going to run for the legislature, for the school board, for the city council, and take back this country. It's your opportunity.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Dawkins. I'm Canadian, so don't blame me. I have a serious yes or no question, Dr. Dawkins, and thank you for your time. We've emailed a couple of times, and I've noticed that when Christians hold conferences, they do some demagoguery and they pitch their wares, and everybody applauds, and we say sarcastic things about the other side, whether it's different religions or atheists. And I saw the same tonight, where funny sloganeering happens and we all laugh and applaud. I want to invite you to come on the radio show that I host. We have an international audience for a half hour, if you can spare it, or 45 minutes or 15 minutes. Not debate. I'm not going to ask you why you won't debate William Lane Craig or everyone else. It will be a simple conversation on the issues, Q&A, with great reverence and respect. That's my yes or no question. And because you're in the UK, we'll have mercy and have a whenever.
I have said that I will debate bishops and archbishops. I'm tomorrow, in fact, going to have a debate with the Cardinal Archbishop of Sydney, and I look forward to that very much. A month or so ago, I had a debate with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I'm shortly to have an encounter, and a little bit before that, with the Chief Rabbi of England. I have said that I will not debate creationists, at least young earth creationists, because to do so would be to give the impression that there is something to debate. And I will not share a platform with a man who has publicly, on more than one occasion, defended the genocide described in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the genocide of the then children of Israel against the Canaanites and the Amalekites and so on the grounds that God ordered them to do so, the same grounds as Abraham ordered to kill his son, and who went on to say, we might think rather magnanimously, oh, but what about the poor Canaanite children? Because they, after all, were not sinful in the way that the Canaanite adults were. Surely it was wrong to slaughter the Canaanite children. And he said, oh no, but you forget, they were going straight to heaven. So it's all right to slaughter those children, because God had plans for them going to heaven. And he went on to say that the people he felt really sorry for were the Israeli, as he called them, the quote, Israeli soldiers who were put in the unfortunate position of having to slaughter all those women and children. I'm not going to name that man, I'm not going to give him the publicity, but I will say again that I will not share a platform with that man.
You agreed to debate Cardinal Pell's to your credit. I've interviewed Cardinal Pell. I'm not a trained theologian, I'm not a cardinal or bishop, I'm just a lowly Catholic radio host. What I'm suggesting is inviting you to a conversation with me. We wouldn't even have to take callers. Anyway, you're on the spot a little bit.
I'm not on the spot in the least. I've given you a very adequate answer. Is there just that one? Is it, or is there another microphone? Have you got a microphone?
Hello, Professor Dawkins.
Yes.
It's nice to see you again. In your speech, in the recent rally, you suggested, actually said, that we should mock believers when they say something that is obviously not true. Now, my question is, should we take this stance when we find believers that are certainly not as daft as the guy who just came before?
Well, no, I don't want to suggest that. Nor did I mean to suggest that we should mock the believers. And I admit that my wording was unfortunate. What I tried to say, and I did say as well, was that you could mock beliefs without necessarily mocking the believers. I quoted Johann Hari, the British journalist, who said, I respect you too much as a person to respect your ridiculous beliefs. Now, I want to modify that a little bit and to say, I respect you as a person too much to believe that you could possibly hold those ridiculous beliefs. And I challenge you either to deny that you hold them, in which case to deny the religion that you claim to belong to, or to give a reason why they're not ridiculous. And the particular one that I picked on was the Roman Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation, according to which the wafer becomes literally the body of a first century Jew when blessed by a priest, and the blood and the wine becomes his blood. Now, all Roman Catholics are required to believe that. I don't believe that many of them actually do. I don't think for one single moment that John F. Kennedy, for example, believed that. I rather suspect that John F. Kennedy may well have been an atheist. But we can never know that, because any politician who is an atheist doesn't get elected, and so obviously he had to pretend to be religious. So what I was trying to encourage people at the Greater Rally to do is don't let people get away with hiding behind the convention that it's impolite to question somebody's religious belief. If you meet somebody who says he's a Roman Catholic, say, really? You mean you believe that the wafer is literally the body of Jesus? You really believe it's literally the body of Jesus? And I think that she or he will look rather ashamed and rather foolish and will say, no, as a matter of fact, I don't. And then you say, well, why do you call yourself a Roman Catholic then? Why don't you deny your Roman Catholicism? And if he's a politician, he'll say, because if I did, I wouldn't get elected. And that's something that needs to be changed. That's something that needs to be changed because as long as politicians think that they've got to lie about being religious in order to get elected, they'll go on lying, and the myth that this country is a country of religious maniacs will go on. And we've got to stop that. And people in this room are ideally placed to do so.
Which was a huge inspiration for me. I'm glad that I heard it, and I'm glad to have it subtitled in Spanish for the Spanish-speaking people who want to hear it.
Dr. Dawkins, I read The Selfish Gene about 12 years ago, and it really changed my worldview and it changed my life. I want to thank you very much for that. And after that, I immediately read The Mean Machine by Susan Blackmore, and I contacted Ms. Blackmore. We exchanged about 5 or 6 emails, and that conversation gave me the courage to ask you this question. I don't mean to insult your intelligence at all. I have the utmost respect for you. But I'm very curious personally if the use of psychedelics has played any role whatsoever in your understanding. In your understanding of your body.
Well, rather to my regret, the answer is no.
I have a science question for you. It sounded like you were a proponent of eugenics during your slideshow, and this might have gone over my head. Are you at all worried that because some genes might be more popular than, say, others, and people would have the ability to choose them, that it would reduce genetic diversity and perhaps make populations more susceptible?
Yes, I hope I didn't come across as an opponent of genetics. Of eugenics. I wasn't, and I'm not. What I was trying to say was that we should examine, in an intelligently designing sort of way, the pros and cons of eugenics. I take it you mean positive eugenics rather than negative eugenics. I'm fully in favour of negative eugenics. When it comes to positive eugenics, I was advocating that we should examine the pros and cons intelligently, as part of intelligently designing our morals and our ethics. And when we do that, it's my belief that we will find objections to it, and you just raised one, and there probably would be others as well. But I think it's something that needs to be discussed, not simply rejected out of hand because on absolutist grounds, because we can't even contemplate it, we can't even begin to think about it, because we've set our faces against it without further discussion.
Thank you very much.
My question is simple. I just want to know, did you liken killing a baby that suffers to eating a lamb?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I want to know, did you liken killing a baby that suffers to eating a lamb?
Yes. I thought that the lamb probably would suffer more than killing an embryo, not a baby, an embryo. I shouldn't have answered. I shouldn't have fallen for your trick using the word baby for an embryo.
Hi, Dr. Dawkins. How do you think accelerating developments in information technologies, genetic engineering, mind sciences, artificial intelligence, and perhaps even the moral zeitgeist might force a cultural awareness of promise and perils so extraordinary and extraordinarily evident that this type of future change, brain machine interfaces, maybe consciousness backups, morality drugs, or perhaps even therapies, might they undermine religious claims of super sister salvation so much as to utterly demoralize the religious community by future shock of rapid exposure to a world incompatible with their beliefs?
Well, I would like to say yes, but what astonishes me is that we haven't already done that. I mean, 50 years ago, I don't understand how it's possible for so many people to retain medieval superstitions in the face of what we now know from modern science. So I'm glad to be able to answer your question and say yes, but we've been wrong before, and we've got a fight on our hands still. I think we better stop there. Thank you very much indeed.